All right, 5 seconds. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are here today for a work session. Let me first recognize that we have a couple of board members that are with us telephonically. We have Member Gallo, who is in Tallahassee. Member Gallo, are you on the line?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm here.
And thank you. And Member Gould, are you present with us in virtually?
I am, thank you.
All right, and all other members of the board are here present and in person. So we have certainly a quorum. We have unanimous support of this work session, which we have all been waiting for and excited to hear from Ms. Lindsay. But before we begin, let me ask you all to join us, if you will, for a moment of silent meditation followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. And now for the pledge.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And just as a reminder, we are still under a mandatory mask requirement for all adults on the premise of Orange County Public Schools. That includes the chambers and the lobby. This would be a good time for me to remind everybody to do what I didn't do, and that's turn off your cell phones or turn them on to silent. I also want to take a moment before we begin to thank Dr. Jenkins for extending the mask requirement. Certainly, we hope that we are coming to the end of the Omicron spread variant, but of course there's the Omicron stealth now. So with a little luck, that will not materialize into anything meaningful. But I think it was certainly responsible and prudent, and from the feedback that I've received from teachers and parents, it was extremely well received, and a lot of grateful, relieved families out there. So thank you for that. As I mentioned before, we are going to have a presentation regarding our ESE program and the audit conducted by our independent auditor, Ms. Lindsay. And we're very excited to hear that. I know board members have had a chance to have a briefing, but this will be a great opportunity for us to have a full report and to have a discussion. And I would encourage board members, the questions that you may have asked in private, if you think there might be questions that would benefit members of the public. We have so many parents of our ESE students that are very engaged, which is a huge blessing for our students in particular, our ESE students in particular, to have parents that are so engaged in their children's education. And I think there are probably questions that they would ask if they were here. So that's why I want to encourage board members to ask the questions that they may have asked in private so that we all can benefit, especially the parents of those students. Ms. Lindsay, welcome and thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the board, Dr. Jenkins. I'm happy to be here this afternoon to discuss with you the results of the last of 4 audits related to the district's ESE program that you requested last year. And we'll have a brief review to start off. First of all, you may recall that a list of topics had been compiled by the Chief Academic Officer from emails and interviews with school board members. The detailed list was grouped into common topics, 4 of which are listed on this slide, and you've seen this slide before. As agreed at your work session last year, these were the 4 areas where we focused our attention. 3 of these audits were completed last year and discussed with you on December 7th. Today we will talk about the 4th one, use of financial resources. First, a review of the overall objective, scope, and methodology for these audits. It was really, at your direction, a lot of analysis. What's really going on? What does the data show? So we did perform extensive analysis of the ESE program and various aspects of it over primarily the last 2 school years, although in this presentation you will see some data from the 3rd year back. And our methodology, which is detailed in Appendix 1 of the report, basically, in summary, consisted of data analysis, interviews, and review of documentation. For this engagement, we also obtained data for similar sized districts in the state of Florida from the Florida Department of Education so that we could do comparisons with our data, and you will see that as we proceed. Again, this is a refresher. The sampling plan that we used for a deeper dive on individual schools was a sample of 40 schools, representative of all of the characteristics of the district that we could envision so that there would be no skewing or slanting of data because we didn't kind of have a good cross-section of information. It was designed to avoid that, and in this case, for this audit, we met with each principal at the schools as well as reviewing their budget information, and I have the details on that shortly. So, for ESE funding and resource usage, this one really is all about the money. We focused on sources and uses of financial resources for the district's ESE program with particular emphasis, as I said, on the past 2 years. We looked both at the resources available to pay for these costs as well as how the resources were expended and what the costs actually were for these 2 years. A bit of background, because this is a big area, and I think background helps to sort of set the context. Schools provide exceptional student education services to students with physical, emotional, behavioral, and learning disabilities and to gifted students. Now, in Florida, ESE education is funded primarily by the Florida Education Finance Program, otherwise known as FEFP. And that includes supplemental ESE guarantee funds, which I'll explain later. ESE funding is provided over and above base funding for the education of all district students via a weighting factor that considers the amount of additional services those students might require for their education. Additionally, the district receives funding from the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, otherwise known as IDEA or IDEA, and that is federal money, not state. The weights that are established to different levels of ESE students help to convey the extent of the services that they need to meet their educational needs. And they range from those weights, the weights, not the levels, from even 1 to more than 5.5 times the level of a base education. This means that the extra services are deemed to be required and that many multiples of services to provide the necessary education. The highest weights are for levels 4 and 5, where services could include extensive modifications to the learning environment and may require continuous and intense one-on-one assistance, or multiple services, or substantial modifications to the routine educational processes. Students in these categories may be wheelchair-bound, require assistance eating or with personal hygiene, or may have severe cognitive functional limitations. Funding, as I've said earlier, could be perceived as a layering, with everyone's educational funding at the base, because we have to educate every student in the district, and then the weighting factors for the additional services needed for ESE piled on top, and the federal money at the very top. This diagram displays how the various sources of funds for ESE are layered on top of base funding. All district students are in the bottom base. By virtue of weights applied to ESE students based on those additional services I described a moment ago, additional funding is provided for those students. So I've highlighted in the next level on the pyramid, levels 4 and 5, which are weighted in the FEFP. Levels 1, 2, and 3 are provided in supplemental funding called ESE Guarantee, but that's still in Florida considered part of the overall FEFP funding. Altogether, the money provided from all of these sources provides resources to the district to pay for ESE program costs. So let's talk about budgets and learn how these resources are provided to create a budget. At OCPS, our budget starts with and is built around FTE, or the full-time equivalent student enrollment, school by school, classroom by classroom, school by school. FTE is the foundation of each school's budget. Each school's enrollment forecast is used to calculate the amount of money, an allocation, that will be provided to each school for its operations. Allocations are made for various types of costs based on projected FTE. Some allocations are fixed at a certain number per school. For example, one principal or one media specialist, perhaps. Other allocations are variable based on FTE, with breakpoints at certain points as the FTE increases. For example, the funds allocated for an elementary school's music, art, and PE teachers will be greater in elementary schools with larger enrollment. The allocation amounts and the breakpoints are determined and approved by the Division of Teaching and Learning. This allocation methodology is built into an Excel budget model managed by the district's Office of Management and Budget. Principals use these budget models to document their decisions about how to spend the resources allocated to their schools. Their proposed budgets are approved by their area superintendents and then incorporated into the district's overall budget. The entire budget process is conducted over a one-year period. The timeline here is a graphic display of that, along with key points during the process. As I said earlier, FTE is the foundation, so this process begins with Survey 2 FTE from the preceding school year, which starts our estimation of the next year's and gets refined as we get Survey 3 data, and then as enrollments actually show up in the schoolhouse when school begins. Once school starts, adjustments can occur when actual FTE differs from the projections used in developing the budget. These adjustments are called recalculations and can require principals to change their staffing. So this is all our background information. That's not really audit results per se, but just to kind of give some context and background. This is a summary of some of the procedures that we performed. As I said earlier, the complete list of our detailed procedures is in Appendix 1 to your report. And I should have mentioned earlier, but our report and management's response were attached in BoardDocs for this agenda, and you have that available. So we did perform extensive procedures, summarized on this slide, and dug into the sources and uses of funding, and did a lot of data analysis. We'll get right into it now. This report and this presentation cover our results in the sections dealing with the topics on this slide. We began with how funds are managed at the schools, then looked at the costs of our ESE program. We then reviewed the funding sources received for ESE education and how they are expended. And finally, we looked at Medicaid. In the coming slides, we will review the results in each of these areas. The first section addresses management of funds at schools. As I said earlier, we worked with the sample of 40 schools with which you are already familiar. We reviewed the budgets that those schools submitted by the principals and the budget status summary reports of actual expenditures for each school, then met with each school principal. And while each school has its unique needs and characteristics, we have summarized some of the commonalities in our report and on this slide. So, generally speaking, principals said that they do adhere strictly to required ESE staffing ratios. They use designated ESE funding first, upon the advice of the Office of Management and Budget, because that money doesn't roll from year to year. They often have to split fund positions, either because a person on staff is serving multiple constituencies, or one source of funding is not sufficient for the entire position. We'll talk a little bit more about split funding later. They indicated that ESE designated funds are not sufficient to fully cover what they need to do on their campus for the ESE program. Almost all of the ESE designated funding is used for personnel, and we have the data on that coming up as well. As I indicated earlier, recalculations can be difficult and painful, and I'm sure you've talked to people who've had to deal with that, and for members of the public watching, that is when the rubber hits the road, so to speak, if the enrollment projection is high and staff have to be reduced. And most of them indicated they really want to mainstream the ESE students where that is supported by the IEP for that student. So we received the funds from the state. We've allocated those funds to the schools. The schools have developed their budgets from those allocations, and school begins, and we start recording actual costs of educating students, including ESE. So let's see what we did with it. This table recaps the costs for a student, an unweighted student, in the ESE program according to data compiled by the Florida Department of Education. We represent this on a per-student basis because it's easier to understand sometimes than using gross budget numbers in the millions of dollars. And as an educational institution, we relate best to students. We obtained the data from the state program cost reports. On their website, they call them transparency reports. The data show that for every dollar of ESE funding the district received, it spent another 53 cents per student in fiscal 21, or another 64 cents per student in 2020. Our costs of educating ESE students exceeded the funding we received for that purpose. And one might wonder, is this typical? And so we compared ourselves with other districts to see. I realize on the screen it may be a little hard to see, but hopefully in your hard copy it's a little easier. The orange bar is Orange County. That's kind of easy to do for us. The other bars represent the other large districts in the state, as well as, on the far right, the state as a whole. You'll notice that we're really right in the mix. Most every other district in the state, and certainly those large districts with whom we compare ourselves, are also experiencing roughly one-third funding shortfall. That's a rough estimation, even the state as a whole. So we compare right in there with our peer group as well as with the state as a whole. You may note that the Southeast Florida districts are somewhat higher in absolute dollars than those in other parts of the state. This is largely due to what's called the district cost differential, which is a component of the FEFP funding provided to districts with a higher cost of living. However, that doesn't tell the whole story. The mix of ESE student weights is also a factor, as these charts are calculated again, I will say it again, on an unweighted FTE basis. So now we'll compare ourselves on the total ESE student costs. These are sort of macro pictures of funding and costs, but how much do we actually spend per student? In theory, a student with an identical IEP should have the same services provided in any Florida district at approximately the same cost. The main factor that would influence different costs being variations in salary levels, because different districts have different salary levels. But the same IEP should produce roughly the same services at roughly the same costs around the state. This chart shows that Orange County spent in fiscal 21 $12,608 per ESE student, and that compares with the other large districts as you see on the chart. The data for fiscal 20 is also presented on the right. Again, I would say that we're right in the mix. There's not an outlier situation here, and Palm Beach does have more cost per student because they have more resources available. Now we're going to look at revenues. We've just looked at costs. What does it cost to educate a student? Now we're going to look at the sources of funding for paying those costs. We have three primary sources of ESE revenues. The ESE guarantee, which I've talked about before, the federal money, IDEA, which I mentioned briefly, and then the FEFP, which is the base part. These charts show the totals for the last 3 years, and I didn't print the total on here, but in fiscal 21, we had $162 million, and in fiscal 20, $169 million, and in fiscal 19, $167. So we've got significant funding here that is our educational resources available for ESE education. And by the way, these amounts include funding for charter schools, ESE programs, and for support for private school ESE students, which in 2021 totaled almost $10 million. Let's talk about the ESE guarantee first. This is state funding that is part of the FEFP, but it is supplemental to the funding provided to educate all students and calculated, as I've said previously, based on FTE weights assigned to ESE level. It is allocated to students based on ESE levels 1, 2, and 3 projected FTE, and used almost entirely for personnel. The employees hired with this money are ESE employees in the schools and those who serve more than one school, such as school psychologists and speech and language therapists. As you will note on the slide, more than 99% of this money is spent on personnel. Positions that are exclusive to ESE are pre-approved. For example, a varying exceptionalities teacher or an ESE para. Those positions are pre-approved for principals to purchase with this source of funding. Non-ESE positions, if a principal wishes to use some of this money for those, must be approved individually with justification, and I'll explain when that might be applicable in just a moment. We noted that non-personnel expenditures, which amount to less than 1% of total ESE guarantee expenditures, are approved via emails back and forth between the requester, the approver, and the budget department, and we have recommended that they use the established workflow process for approvals that already exist with the district. Staff wholeheartedly agreed with that recommendation, and they're moving forward to make that happen. I mentioned split funding earlier. ESE funds are not sufficient to cover every ESE position. In some cases, an ESE position must be funded from more than one revenue source. Non-ESE positions may also be partially funded from ESE dedicated sources. And I'll explain how that happens. First of all, let's look at what positions were funded over the past 2 years. I'm going to read down the left-hand side of this slide where fiscal year 2021 is presented. At the top of the column, 512 employees in ESE titled positions were paid in whole or in part from this source. 242 of them were 100% funded from the ESE guarantee. 270 were funded in part from ESE guarantee and from other fund sources. Of the 270 split-funded positions, 18 were in titles that were not specifically related to ESE. Now, position titles don't always reflect the role performed. The 14 exceptions we had earlier, we were explained that those positions were eligible for funding because those instructors taught gifted children. It might have been a 5th grade teacher or a history teacher, but they had gifted children who are part of the ESE population in their classrooms. So that the principal would explain this to the budget department and the ESE department, and a split funding would be approved based on the ratio of non-ESE and ESE students in the classroom. When we were performing our tests, we looked for the gifted endorsements on those teacher certificates since they had gifted students in their classrooms. Some of them didn't have a gifted endorsement, which is fine. There's no prohibition against a non-endorsed teacher having gifted students in the classroom. But in those instances, the district is supposed to inform the parents with a notice. It's called out of field. And we noted instances 14 times involving 13 teachers. One appeared in both years that we analyzed, where that out of field notice was not taken care of. So we've made a recommendation that the schools be sure to do this in the future. And you see that in our report and in management's response. Next, we'll talk about IDEA funding. Let's see. Oh, hang on, I'm sorry. Let me finish talking about substitutes. A small amount of ESE guarantee funding is used to pay for substitutes for those staff members funded from ESE guarantee when they have to be out of the classroom. And we noted when we were looking at the reimbursements that the Kelly substitutes are not required to have an ESE endorsement to their certificate. But as I believe you all know, no substitutes are required to have a certificate or an endorsement. We wanted to just make a recommendation that this be evaluated as to whether in the future it might be a good practice, or perhaps that additional training could be offered to substitutes in ESE classrooms with an additional stipend of some sort in that situation. As we know, in today's climate, it's hard enough to fill substitute positions without adding additional obstacles or hurdles. So we didn't recommend that that be implemented, just that it be evaluated. Now we'll talk about IDEA. IDEA may be used only to pay the excess costs of providing special education and related services to students with disabilities and may not replace state or local funding. This is known as supplement, not supplant. As with the ESE guarantee, most IDEA funding is spent on personnel. There is a bit more non-personnel expenditures here because IDEA is used to pay for contracted services such as physical and occupational therapy and to equip and supply new ESE units. So we're buying mostly people, but some things as well. A significant portion of the IDEA funding is used to pay for bus monitors for students who have IEPs that require that assistance. Overall, over the past 3 years, more than 86% of IDEA fundings were used for salaries and benefits. Some of the non-personnel expenditures, other than what I just mentioned to you, included substitute services for those same faculty, supplies, and instructional materials. And we did see some positions split funded here, but they were strictly ESE positions. Here's a similar chart about how the positions funded from IDEA line up. I'm going to again read down the 2020 column. 944 employees in ESE positions were funded in whole or in part from IDEA in the fiscal 21 year. 436 of them were 100% funded from that source, and another 508 were split funded. Now we'll move on to a small category of resources that is known by the acronym FIDDLERS. This stands for Florida Diagnostic and Learning Resources System, and also includes the Florida Inclusion Network. This is a state grant from which the district records approximately $1.8 million a year over recent years. The service provides diagnostic and instructional support to ESE programs and families of ESE students. The grant is operated in the state of Florida in groups of districts that the state calls Action Resource Centers. OCPS is in a center with 6 other Central Florida districts. The grant is managed by one district in each center acting as a fiscal agent. Orange County Public Schools is the fiscal agent for our center. Therefore, the $1.8 million that flows through our books is used for all 7 districts in our center, not just for OCPS. The chart on this slide shows the positions that are funded from that money and how many serve the district only and how many serve the center as a whole. And you see the data on the chart in front of you. The amount of money involved is not significant to the overall ESE program, and it is mostly used for training and support and diagnostic services, as I mentioned earlier. We also have, in terms of managing the program, the ESE department at the district. In our session in December, we talked about how that group is subdivided into 5 subdepartments, and they're listed here on the slide. I know you're very familiar with that. Like most departments, the expenditures here are mostly for individuals as well. The whole district budget is mostly people if you exclude capital. But there are costs in these departments also associated with curriculum support, training, in-county travel for personnel who must travel from school to school, dues and fees, and things of that sort. I have a chart that shows you a pictorial of those expenditures for the past 2 fiscal years. You might notice an odd variant between the 2 years. That occurred because right in the middle between these 2 years, approximately 250 health employees were moved from instructional support, behavior and specialized, to health services. This was part of a reorganization by the department that they believed would help them better serve the needs during their pandemic. But it's the same staff, the same overall money, just moved from one operational unit to another. Next, we'll take a look at Medicaid. We evaluated Medicaid even though it's not specifically an ESE program. School districts are permitted to file for reimbursement for providing eligible services to students on our campuses who are Medicaid eligible. Examples of the type of reimbursements are noted on the slide. But it should be noted that we can also provide services to students who do not have ESE IEPs. For example, a student who goes to the nurse for an insulin injection may not have an IEP or be an ESE student, but that service can be billed to Medicaid if that student is Medicaid eligible. But the majority of these services are for ESE students. We evaluated the process of filing claims and how the procedure moved forward with some testing. First of all, let's recap the revenue, just to give you perspective. Over the last 3 years, the district received more than $26.7 million in Medicaid reimbursements. And this money is recorded in the general fund. The district contracts with a third-party claims administrator to administer this whole process, which involves a predetermination of Medicaid eligibility, and then a capturing and tracking and submitting of claims and resolving any denials that might occur along the way, as well as ultimately securing the reimbursement payment. We noted during our research that the Florida Department of Education offers any school district a cost-free symptom for Medicaid claim tracking. And we asked why the district here chose to contract this function instead of using the state system. We were told that staff believes that the contracted service does a better job, but we were not able to obtain any data or analysis to indicate that that was the case. It may very well be that paying the cost of third-party administrators is more cost-effective, but being analytical people like we are, we like to see data to back that up. So we've made a recommendation that the district perform a cost-benefit analysis here and see if, in fact, we might be getting the best arrangement for our budget. There are almost 30 districts statewide who use the FDLE program, including some that are near us, as well as some that are close in size, like Pinellas, which is close. Now, we did test a sample of Medicaid claims, very small sample, because this was not a Medicaid audit, this was a ESE audit. But we selected 13 specific individual student claims out of a submittal, and the first thing we wanted to do was see that we had the parent consent form on file for that. 9 of the 13 requested were readily available. The other 4 were a bit of a challenge for staff to produce. 2 were obtained fresh during our audit, and 2 were never able to be provided. The students, I guess, were no longer with the district. This was complicated because this form is obtained one time in the enrollment of a student with the district. It's not an annual form. And up until very recently, these were all paper. So it's easy for paper to get lost or misfiled. Nowadays, these forms are obtained electronically during the annual, or in the enrollment process, and should be able to be retrieved more securely. We did recommend that the schools be diligent in this regard, and they are moving forward. I do want to point out a positive aspect of the district's third-party claims administration arrangement, and that is that the contractor has an important audit report dealing with its controls over our data. This is important because they have access to student records in order to perform the services that they do for our district. And security over those records is imperative because they contained personally identifiable information of students and their families. This type of audit, commonly called a SOC report, is required by the district's ITS standard 006. And I just want to point out that they have it, and that's a very good thing. We also took a look at private insurance. A few Medicaid eligible students may also have private insurance. It's not common, but it does happen. And it is permissible for districts to file claims with students' private insurance when eligible services are provided. Of course, parents must consent, and they may not be required to provide any copay or deductible. We performed some research to see if this is practiced anywhere, and we did not find any Florida districts who are doing it, and only one Ohio district that has just a handful of these situations. Most do not. IDEA can be used to cover parents' copay and deductible, but it's unclear whether that would have to come from the same pot of money we already get, or we would be able to get additional resources. Obviously, if it has to come from our currently existing IDEA funds, that would just dilute them further. We did inquire of district management as to whether we had ever pursued this, what the analysis had been, and the people with whom we spoke have not looked into this matter. So we're recommending that the district crunch the numbers to see whether at some point the cost and effort needed to file private insurance would be worthwhile, and to periodically, I don't know, every 3 to 5 years or something, recheck to validate this decision or change course if it looks like that's a better option. For now, based on our research, we agree that not filing for private insurance is appropriate, but it might be an option at some time in the future. We made 6 recommendations as a result of this audit, 4 which I would characterize as opportunities for improvement, and 2 which I would characterize as deficiencies that need to be corrected. They're summarized on this slide, and I believe we've touched on each of them. The first one involves using the district's I-BUY workflow process to document approvals for the use of ESE guarantee funds for non-personnel costs. The second one is dealing with the out-of-field status notifications for teachers of gifted students who do not have that endorsement. The third one is evaluating whether substitutes in ESE classrooms should be required to have additional training or an ESE certification. The fourth one is dealing with obtaining and retaining the parent consent forms for Medicaid claims. The fifth one is the one we talked about just a moment ago about periodically evaluating the cost versus the benefit of using a contracted Medicaid claims administrator compared to the service offered by the state. And the last one is the one we just discussed about periodically evaluating whether to bill students private insurance for eligible services. Our conclusion as a result of all of this work is that the district's practices for allocating and expending resources of the ESE program are consistent, equitable, and operating effectively and efficiently. This report was finalized and discussed with management in January, and you do have a copy of our report and management's response with your agenda materials. and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lindsay. I am sure we have questions. I'm just waiting for board members. Hold with us. Member Felder.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, Ms. Lindsay, I would like to tell you thank you. And I so enjoy when I have my private time with you and I have so many questions. And you're so very patient with so much of the stuff I may not understand. And I appreciate this, the summary, and we were able to download and get some information. First of all, I am very happy that the audit was done. I believe you did an exceptional job in making sure, like people used to say, cross every T, dot every I, because it's important that our parents, as well as our teachers of ESC students, that they really see what's being done with the funds and they have an assurance that their children are being cared for in the proper way. That is so important, and teachers don't need the stress of wondering where funds are going to be for certain types of materials that they may need to use to make sure the children who are ESC get equitable treatment. That is so important. And I'm so grateful that you took the time to dot every I and cross every T. Now, one of the concerns about the possibility, and it's probably going to cost us money, superintendent, or may be something impossible to try to force substitute teachers to be ESC endorsed. However, we talked about it in our meeting, and we both agreed that perhaps the best choice will be additional training, because I do believe that our substitute group, that company that hires the substitutes out, they do try to offer that, because it's important that children, ESC children, are in a classroom with a teacher, whether it's a substitute or regular teacher, that they are properly trained and know really how to work with the children, because we want to do our best, even if the teacher is absent, that the child gets the best educational experience. Not going to be the same because the teacher's not there, but still, but to make sure we do that. So I am in favor. I know it's not put in policy, because that may be difficult to do if you put it in policy, because that might not can occur. We have hard enough time getting substitute teachers in. But certainly, if we could think about adding that, suggesting that there be some additional training for substitute teachers that come into ESC classes. I am also, and I'm going to wrap it up, very happy about the situation with Medicaid. I did have some questions about if the student or the family decides to have private insurance, they don't meet the deductible, are we going to have to meet it? And then you said the IDA funds would do that, right? If the district, if the parents cannot pay the deductible, the IDEA funds would do that for them?
That is an allowable use of IDEA funds, yes.
Okay. So hopefully we haven't had that situation, because you talked about a situation in Ohio, right? We have not had the situation here in Florida.
We do not bill private insurance at the present time.
Okay, well, that's a good thing. Okay, I think that's kind of all. I probably may say something later, but okay, I'll wait, because I think some of the other fellow board members may say some stuff, because I'll talk about something else. I'm looking at the monies and stuff, and the principals having autonomy and so forth. I'll talk about that later if I need to. But I just wanted to say that in the beginning again, to thank you for your very thorough report and answering all of our little private questions that we have when you're meeting with us. I appreciate that so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Felder. Let's go to Member Kester Dental.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Lindsay. That was, as usual, I appreciate your objectivity and your thoroughness. And for anyone who's watching from home or from work, I want to just reiterate that Ms. Lindsay does not work for the superintendent, but works for the board. And that's important for really establishing that trust when people may have a doubt or wonder what's happening when they don't see things that are not evident. So the fact that you were able to do this, and I mean, you did exactly what the board wanted, and I appreciate this. You really made the funding visible. And that wasn't something that I, as a board member, could do when I explain anything to an ESE parent, exactly where the funding is coming from and what resources we have. So you really did a great job, and your team did a great job of really following the dollars and illustrating how they're being spent and utilized. And that really helps us to strengthen that trust we have from our parents and our community members. So I appreciate that. If I can, I just want to recap my understanding, and please correct me if I have something wrong. So we receive federal funding from IDEA annually. We receive state funding for ESE in the form of a weighted FTE for those students. And 99% of those dollars go to salaries, essentially.
99% of the ESE guarantee funds.
Guarantee funds?
Yes.
Okay. But all of those ESE guarantee funds and the others they are spent. The ones that are earmarked for our ESE students are spent on our ESE students.
Yes, that much and more.
Right. So that was, I was glad and relieved to see that. Because I know there are some parents who believe that we are not putting our resources in the right places or adding them or contributing to as much as we are supposed to by law to our ESE students. And your audit showed that we definitely are, and then some. So while I'm glad to see that we are covering and making sure that our ESE students are being served, it also highlights another problem with our funding. So even though we have the weighted FTEs, the IDEA dollars, and the base student allocation, it's still not enough. And we have to reach into our general fund yet again. So we continue to reach into that general fund to cover a lot of shortfalls from the state. When it comes to our transportation budget, the state gives us, I believe, about $35 million, but that does not come close to what we need to get our kids to school. So we put in about $30 million from our general fund to cover that. So that's another shortfall. And then we're making up the difference with the ESE funding, and teacher pay raises come out of that, and salaries. Our health insurance, I guess, is all part of that. So it helped to illustrate how stretched we are as a district and how hard our district and the professionals here work to stretch every dollar to make sure we're doing what we need to. And we are feeling the pressure. It's not just a matter of penny pinching, but that contributes to the burden on more of our employees when they are asked to do more with less. And so your audit helped to highlight that yet again. I have a question about our school-based budgeting that if you can't answer, maybe the superintendent can. I recall when I was teaching at the schools, elementary school, I would be a part of a school-based budget committee. And that was very informative to see how little wiggle room principals have, and how difficult it is and tricky sometimes to make your teachers line up with the number of students you have and make it all fit with all the different variables. But do we have, is it a common practice that every year each school has a school-based budget committee that helps to oversee or participate in that budgeting?
I will defer to Dr. Jenkins and her team because I don't know every school's practice.
Okay.
So principals are still encouraged to share with their faculty all of their budget information, but you've touched on a very important point. There's not a lot of wiggle room once they meet the categorical requirements and the class size reduction requirements. There's not much left for any kind of discussion with their faculties, but all of our principals do have those discussions with faculty members.
Okay, if I may, in an effort to increase transparency and trust and understanding by our community members and parents, and even teachers, because I know not all faculty members participate or are aware, if we could make that more of a regular process at each school and make sure that we have maybe an ESE parent, an ESE teacher represented on that committee?
So there is a regular process, and I believe their SACs also have a look at their budget, and that would be those would be the SAC, SAC or SAC, and that would be both staff representation and parent representation. When you say more regular, SACs on an annual basis participate as well.
Okay, is it just the SAC that would review the budget, or is there a budget committee from the SAC? Are you just saying that the SAC committee fills
So there's
that
something
role?
required. So Mr. Palmerini is trying to get my attention. There's something required statutorily that includes the SAC. I'll let him speak to it.
It's actually,
Palmerini, you recognize?
thank you, Madam Chair. It's actually in the contract, Article 20, Section C. A minimum of 3 to a maximum of 5 teachers from each school shall serve on their school's budget advisory committee formed for the purpose of making recommendations on the school's general fund budget. Teacher members may be elected by the faculty. Minutes from such meetings may be requested by the faculty and may be posted on CTA bulletin board and at the school by the association representative. So there's a contractual budget advisory committee.
Mr. Palmerini, would you speak to the SAC having exposure to the budget as well, if you'll take a moment to look for that?
Yeah, give me one moment and I'll chime in when I find it.
While you're looking that up, I just think that even if there isn't a lot of wiggle room or flexibility by the principals, I think it's extremely important to have that transparency and let people know that there isn't a slush fund somewhere that someone's controlling, even if it's just to have people understand how the public dollars are being spent at their local school site. I think it will help maybe, again, build trust and also understanding of how tight our funding is.
Member Casterdental, maybe we can move on, because I actually want to kind of piggyback on some of your comments, if I could, and then we'll recognize Mr. Palmerini, because I completely agree with you that sometimes we go through a process not because we believe that we're going to find a solution to the problem, but sometimes the process itself solves a problem. And the process of just looking for funding and bringing more people to the table in that process, as we're going to do, as we're doing right now with our faculty, I hope there are, this is a genuine process. I hope that we will find collectively some, even if they're small individually, that collectively they amount to enough money that we can keep that longevity supplement indefinitely. That would really be my hope. But I also feel that the process that we go through, if we can build trust in the course of this, even if the answers aren't the ones we necessarily want to find, if we can at least understand what the problem is, we have a better chance at collectively, I want to use the word attacking, not a good word, but maybe that's how I'm feeling deep down inside, addressing the problem. So one of the things I also think that, one of the things that I hear is the concern, and then I do have specific questions to this, but I wanted to just kind of piggyback on where you were, the concern about how much money is being spent at the district. So when you're going through the school-based budgeting process, I think that the question I get all the time is, how much money is going into the ESC department? How much money is going into this department? We're seeing the numbers of employees at the district increasing. And I've heard these over the 3 years I've been here. And yet, comparatively speaking, when you look at our administrative overhead on a per student basis compared to other districts, we are quite low. Dr. Jenkins, if I can call on you for those statistics, and then perhaps from the point of view of also just recognizing in the absence of trust, you have to go the extra mile and then some to produce evidence to support this, and maybe Ms. Lindsay can help us on this front. Dr. Jenkins, I know when I came in, it's one of the things I was focused on and immediately reassured when I saw the administrative overhead. Can you address that for us here?
There is, certainly, Madam Chair, there is a state report that comes out annually. We were in the top 10. I believe there was no other large urban district that had a lower ratio of administrative cost per student. I can't quote the exact number. I was looking for our chief financial officer, but we were the lowest of large urban districts and among the top 10, I believe, even out of 67 districts for keeping our administrative cost as low as possible. I can certainly get you the actual ranking. It's done every year. It's a state report that is available.
And she is in the back of the room. I've been looking for her too, and was thinking, is she not here? But she is. She is there with her computer. So maybe we can hear from her briefly, and then we'll come back to Mr. Palmerini.
And also, as she's coming down, I want to be clear. So between the faculty reviewing the budget and the SAC having an opportunity to give input as well, I want to be very transparent in that folks don't believe there's some large sums of money that are eligible. So our teachers are going through, our entire faculties are going through roundtable discussions to say, what is it that we might be able to squeeze out for teacher raises? And we have a sort of a cheat sheet that says, these are categorical, these are paid for by federal dollars, these are not eligible. Computer purchases are capital dollars that can't be swapped over. And so they actually have a cheat sheet that they can go through. So people aren't frustrated to think there are millions of dollars that they might have some greater input on. It was my concern. Transparency, absolutely, but full disclosure of what's actually eligible for the debate and for the brainstorming around the savings of dollars. Because by the time they finish culling out federal and then state requirements and state categorical dollars and underfunded issues such as our transportation, which we have to cover. It's just very good for folks to know up front so they're not frustrated when they realize how little is still eligible for discussion and manipulating those budgets.
I, for one, I understand completely what you're saying, and managing expectations is important. Mm-hmm. Being frustrated, I would like to see more of our teachers and our parents who are frustrated with us. I would like to see more of them have the opportunity to get frustrated with the process we go through. But I agree with you. I don't want them to feel misled that we're saying, oh, we know there's a pot of gold at the end of this rainbow, just go out there and find it.
Good.
So I'm trying to be as fair and open and honest as I can with people. If I thought there was a pot of gold for 3 years now, I would hope I would have found it. And I would have hoped collectively we would have found it. And I would have hoped that you would have heard this board and understood this board was unified in wanting to find it. So I don't think there is. I hope that there might be some small, incremental changes that we can make, some things that we might be able to trim back on. But I agree with you. When you look at transportation, when you look at ESC and you realize that 53% of the funding, we're putting in 53% extra funding in order to just meet what we need to do for those children. And we're putting in twice as much funding for transportation as we're legally, and we legally have to do that. And we morally have to do that to get our kids here safely. So those are the big buckets that could be filled by the state at this point if they would just simply fully fund the things that require of us. Ms. Concolino.
Hello. So regarding the administrative costs per student, the Educational Funding Accountability Act requires that a report of administrative expenditures be produced for each school district. So, and this is based on the program cost report. And based on the latest report, which is 1920, we've just completed the 2021. I don't have the administrator for 2021 yet. The results have not come out. But I can tell you that OCPS in 1920 spent $565.20 per student for administrative costs from its general fund. And we continue to have the lowest administrative costs per student among large urban school districts, and we are the 11th lowest of all 67 in the state.
Thank you. That was exactly the information. And perhaps you could share with the board separately, not just that information, but where we could independently pull it up. That would be great. Thank you. I just think sometimes when I hear from parents, I know that information. I've heard it over and over again, but I can't put my fingers on it. And that would be a helpful thing, I think, for all of us to kind of bookmark how we could, and as parents, teachers, everyone who wants more out of us than we're able to deliver. Member Castor-Dental, let's hear if we have an answer from Mr. Palmerini, and I'm going to come back to you to finish. Mr. Palmerini?
Thank you, Madam Chair. 1001,452, that is district and school advisory councils. It says a school advisory council shall be composed of a principal and appropriately balanced number of teachers, education support employees, students, parents, and other business and community citizens who are representative of the ethnic, racial, and economic community served by the school. And then one of the duties listed in subsection 2 of the statute is, with technical assistance from the Department of Education, each school advisory council shall assist in the preparation of the school's annual budget and plan as required by 1008.385 subsection 1. So SACs help the budgeting process at every school, and then we have the contractual school budget advisory committee that also has teacher input on it as well.
Member Castor-Dental, did you get that down, or would you like Mr. Palmerini to send us those statutory citations?
No, I understand that.
Okay.
I've been on the SAC committees, and so I know how they operate. But in an effort to encourage some of the parents to participate, I wonder if it would be helpful when the SAC committee is meeting to have a presentation of the budget. If they open that up, I know it's already open to anyone else who wants to come and attend, but if there is a way to advertise that more on the marquees and let people know they're welcome, we want their input, we want their, because not every person who is on the SAC would necessarily be the same people who are necessarily interested in these budgeting concerns. So I just wonder if there's more we can do to be more inclusive.
And
I'm
Dr.
sure there
Jenkins,
is, but
that's the probably
not-
question not for Mr.
Right.
Palmerini, but for you.
We'll certainly look into it, Madam
Yeah.
Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, when you say that, go ahead, Member Castor-Dental, you're still recognized. Go ahead.
Okay. I just wonder, this may be for Ms. Lindsay, maybe not. I don't know who knows this, but I know we're looking at the state funding and how tight that is, but we're also getting money from the federal government. Is there an expectation or a request or a way to appeal to increase the funding from the IDEA for our students as well, or a process? Or maybe the superintendent knows that.
Yeah, that would be in our platform for lobbying. At a national level, there's concern over adequate funding, and so it's certainly already on the radar. This board can certainly add it to their legislative platform as well. I don't believe it's specifically called out on your federal platform, but we'll check it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member Castellano. I'm really interested to see if there is an opportunity. I was even thinking like maybe presenting it to the PTA, if there were just some sort of a way that a large group, similar to what we did, if somebody has done that in a way to kind of help people walk through the process to understand it, it would be, I think, really beneficial. And PTA is your other group that's, the cheerleaders for the school, but they're also the people engaged enough to benefit from learning the challenges. And I really still believe that the most effective tool at changing the funding equation at the state level is parents across the state. We know it's not us, but if there were just some way maybe through FSBA and the PTSA statewide, if there were some way to just get a movement going, then I think we would have a chance. We're always so frustrated here because our delegation is so supportive of us, and that's wonderful. But if they can't overcome the odds in Tallahassee, then we need to make sure that those that are in a leadership position, those with the most power and influence, have the same constituency with the same knowledge base, crying out for the same thing, and a statewide effort would have a much better chance of gaining the governor's support. We saw what the governor did when he realized teachers needed to be paid more. Unfortunately, that left our veteran teachers way behind. But it does show the power of that position. And we do know that our governor is willing to use his power and use it forcefully. And these could all be good things if we could just find a way to have him use that power to fill the gaps that have been created over the years. So that's where our greatest hope lies. Seems like a long haul, but it is, I think, the only hope that education has right now. So I had a couple of, I did want to comment for anybody who might be watching. Member Castellano made some really good observations about the role of Ms. Lindsay. I also did, for anybody who may have missed this, the reason that Ms. Lindsay is doing this and has done this much broader audit, this is just the last piece, and I think for all of us up here, one of the most critical pieces as well, was because this board asked for that. We have, this entire board is very passionate about the needs of our ESE students and making sure that we do everything right that we can by them to help them succeed, not just in education, but in life. And we also have heard the outpouring of concern from some of our parents and from some of our teachers. And so it was with that this board said, let's independently look at this and see what we can find. So I, from the standpoint of trust, I wanted the public to know that this was an initiative of the board in response to our passion and the passion and concerns that we've heard. I had a couple of questions, and this is probably a question for Dr. Jenkins, but so on slide, I could call it slide, page 14, on page 14, we see that this year we're spending 153% of our 53% of our ESE program funds are coming from outside of our ESE sources of funding. And last year, I think it was 64%. 64%. And then if you go to the next slide, you see that we went from 12,000 789 down to 12,608. It's not a significant difference, but at the same time that we were going down ever so slightly, I noticed that some of our comparator districts were going up. So Dr. Jenkins, I wondered if there's an explanation that you're aware of, and I'm sorry I'm putting you on the spot, I didn't ask ahead of time, but do you have any idea why we would see this slight downtick?
I'm looking for Dr. Vasquez. I don't want to answer inappropriately. We can certainly look into it for you. It is a small amount.
It is.
Yeah. Well,
We would
I
need
see
to
it.
look into the reason for the,
can you speak a little louder?
we would need to look into the reason for the small decline.
And again, I apologize for putting you on the spot. I really do. If you could look into it, because I am pretty sure that there's an explanation, and then just let the board know. One of the other things that I asked Ms. Lindsay about, I was a little surprised to see that, it might be on slide 14, where it shows the
It is.
I was a little surprised when I looked a little more carefully at, so Palm Beach County is actually receiving less per student for ESE funding than Orange County, and so is Broward. And the reason I point those two out is under the district cost comparison differential that the state uses, both of those districts are higher than us. Palm Beach County, I think, is at like about 105% of the state's cost, their cost of hiring personnel, and ours is right around 100.58. So they're 4 percentage points higher than us, almost 5 percentage points higher than us, and yet they're getting less in funding for ESE students. And so I thought that there was just something wrong with this data. And Ms. Lindsay looked into it, and it turns out that the reason for it, you want me to let you explain it? I'll let you explain it.
I'd
You
be
found
happy
it.
to. I'd
You
be
found it.
happy
Go
to.
ahead.
As I said during my presentation, Chair, this information is on a per unweighted FTE basis. And so it doesn't take into consideration how much we actually receive or spend on a weighted basis. Yes, Palm Beach gets a larger amount of money per student because of the district cost differential, but their ESE population has significantly less level 4s and 5s than we do. We have about 4 times as many 4s and 5s as Palm Beach County does. And those of you who are familiar with the weighting of the levels of ESE students would know that those two levels are the most intensive in need of services. And the ESE level 4, if I'm remembering off the top of my head, don't shoot me, Doreen, I think it's like 3.3 something for a level 4, and like 5, north of 5.5 for a level 5 in fiscal 21, I'm talking about. So if it multiplies very quickly, and if we have the mix of the weights can change that dynamic very quickly, because again, these charts are unweighted students. And so in the case of the chair's specific question, I pulled the Palm Beach raw data and looked at it. They have a lot more ESE students than we do, but in terms of the weighted grouping, ours is, for lack of a better word, heavier, and therefore generates that additional difference.
So, and if you also look at Miami-Dade County, they're at 7,400 or at 8,225. That tells you the same thing, that the weighting, or in other words, the composition of their ESE students, we have a higher percentage of level 4, level 5 ESE students. So we're getting more money because of that. I thought that was important for us to know, not because of this audit or the finances, but because I think we need to be mindful and take into consideration when we sometimes hear ourselves compared to Miami-Dade County or Palm Beach or Broward County in terms of stats around their ESE students and I don't know the word I'm looking for, I'm sorry, that the stats were not, if we were looking at level 1 to level 1 ESC students and comparing them, we'd be comparing students at the same level of need. When we're comparing students at 4 or 5 in particular, we're talking about students who have a much greater level of need. So it's not just more expensive, but the approach towards caring towards those children may be different. And so I don't think we can continue to just look at raw data and think that we can make a judgment call about how we're doing. I think we need to look much more carefully. I think the changes this board has wanted to see in a lot of areas when it comes to our ESC students is just spot on right. I have no doubt about that. But I do want to be cautious after seeing this about thinking that we need to have the same numbers as other counties when we don't have the same makeup of a population as these other counties. That was I hope that all made sense. Member Byrd, you're recognized, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for sure, because, we're talking about classrooms that are, have much lower student-teacher ratios. You've got more paras assisting. So yeah, that's a really good point. I want to answer a few questions, and then I have some comments. So let's see. When I talked on in my private briefing with Ms. Lindsay, we talked about the Kelly or the training for the substitute teachers, and I agree with Member Felder that this is definitely an area that concerns me. But for all the reasons that you said, Ms. Lindsay, it's challenging just with the nature of the fact that finding substitutes in itself is challenging. One of the things that I had mentioned during that briefing was talking to Kelly Services about us developing a training that would be available for our substitutes to take, much like they, and I don't know if they're still doing this, but they would do an extra training that a substitute could take, and if they took that training, then they were paid at a higher rate. Same thing with this. If you took this ESC training, then you could be paid at a higher rate when you substituted for an ESC classroom. If we could look at developing something like that, it might be enough incentive to get some of those substitutes trained in just basic things to be able to help them in those classrooms. I would love to see that happen, because I really do feel like these kids need people that, have a little extra special training if they're filling in for that day. On page 7 of the report, it's not in the presentation. It was mentioned that many schools, we're talking about the funding of positions, and many schools, are allocated a 0.5 position for like a school, ESC school staffing specialist. And this is, I think, more a question for Dr. Jenkins, but I remember when we did the other ESC audit report work session, we talked about the workload of the staffing specialists and how they felt, very overworked. And so I think the way it was explained to me, that if they're funded at 0.5, principals will combine, or it says in the report, principals will combine the duties with another position, often like an ESOL compliance specialist, so that they can fund them fully. So my question is, why can't we, in an effort to help with this workload for them, allocate a full position for our staffing specialists as opposed to 0.5?
Dr. Jenkins?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe we've taken care of that because we had some ESSER funds. If it were not for the ESSER funds, the answer would be because we can't afford it.
Okay.
But we have taken care of that in our ESSER application.
Okay. All right. And then I have one more question. This one is in regards to what Mr. Palmerini mentioned earlier about for Dr. Castor-Dental, what she said about the staff budget committee meetings. And I might have misheard him, but I thought the way he read it, it sounded like it said teachers may be on 3 or something. Teachers may be on a school budget committee. Was that correct, Mr. Palmerini? Is it that the teachers can serve, or that the teachers are required to serve on a school budget committee?
I'm getting to the provision again. I think it said a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 5, but give me 1 second.
Okay. Not for SAC, for the, I'm not talking about SAC, I'm talking about for the school that was in the teacher contract.
Yeah, the Article 20, Section C. A minimum of 3 to a maximum of 5 teachers from each school shall serve on their school's budget advisory committee formed for the purpose of making recommendations on the school's general fund budget.
Okay, so then every school does have, I think I kind of missed that if you said that. I'm so sorry. I apologize. But so every school does have this advisory committee for the budget, is in other words what you're saying. And teachers do have to serve on it.
That's my understanding, that every school has it, and under the contract, 3 to 5 teachers have to serve on it.
Okay. Okay, good. And then just in kind of comments on the SAC and PTA, like what you were talking about, Chair, I think the biggest challenge is, I love the idea of trying to figure out how to advertise more, but I know with several of my schools, they try everything to advertise for the SAC, and they even hold their PTA on the same night as their SAC in an effort to get more. And it's just, it's nearly impossible. I have one school that has SAC money that they can't even spend because they have to get a quorum to vote to spend the money. So, and they try everything, meals, feeding, like all kinds of things. And it's such a challenge sometimes to do that, to get parents involved. So, I do think when people come to us with these questions about finances and stuff, that we do need to be referring them. Have you tried going to your SAC meeting? Have you gone to your local school's PTA? Because at the SAC, they talk about the budget. I've always told parents, if you really want to see the genie behind the curtain, go to your SAC meeting, because that's where you learn about everything about the school. That's why I always joined the SAC, because that was how I learned all the background workings of the school district, and the way things worked at my school. So I really, anytime people come to us, I think that's what we definitely need to be doing. I'm very, very appreciative. I told Ms. Lindsay, I gave her numerous compliments about how much I love her work that she does here, and the work she did in this audit. But I'm trying to kind of guess what some things that we may hear, and this is what I'm guessing, and I could be wrong. Well, you've checked everything at the district level. Everything is efficient. The audit said everything is efficient except for those, 5 suggestions. That's all fine and dandy, but when it comes to what my kid is receiving at my school, I still don't think they're getting what they need. And I think this goes back to what we talk about, how there's kind of somewhere the message is getting lost between what we have set up here at the district and what's supposed to be being done and what's actually being done. And so I really want to encourage us to continue to allow our parents figure out more and more ways. And I know you guys are doing a great job, the ESC department. You have such good resources online, and you have, the parent ticket things they can fill out. But I really want to encourage us to figure out ways to help address individual parents' concerns at schools, because I think, there's 200 schools. It's a lot of schools. Sometimes things are not always going to be done right. And so I really feel like the parents have to have a way to communicate out to someone maybe outside the school if they're not getting what they need at the school. And that's, one of the reasons the Parent Advisory Council, I was always a big proponent of that. I thought that was a great way for parents to have a place they could come to share their concerns of ways that their needs are not getting met, because you can say that everything's efficient and equitable and consistent, but if it's your child in your school and you feel like the needs aren't getting met, you still have to have a way to address that. So kudos to the job and kudos to the district, and I'm not trying to take anything away from that, but I still want us to make sure now that we've addressed this side, I want us to keep making sure that we're doing everything we can from the school side. So I think that's all I have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Member Gould, are you still with us? So you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the comments of my fellow board members. I want to follow up a little bit on something that you and Member Castro-Dental highlighted, and I think that is certainly the challenges with the investment in the education to meet the local needs of our community. And I think it's only going to get more confusing, and being clear on sustainable dollars and non-sustainable dollars is going to become very important in our discussions. I just heard on NPR this morning that some of the federal legislators are saying that the schools should use, these temporary funds to boost base salaries, but, I hear nothing about long-term funding after those legislative acts are completed. So that's a concern, and I think it's going to be confusing for our community. And I also wanted to just comment on some other outlines of comments that you all made. And that is, we have a lot of layering of legislation, some of which really needs to be looked at the state level, not just legislation, but policies and procedures by the DOE that need to be looked at and peeled back, because they may not make sense in this current environment. They may not meet the local needs of each and every of the counties in the state of Florida, and they may not meet the needs, certainly, of our residents, our students, our community, nor are they responsive to the current economic impacts that vary widely from county to county because of growth, because of loss of jobs and lag in hospitality that we see, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then of course, with the pandemic, just layering on top of all that. So I don't really have a question, but I thought it was worth highlighting some of the challenges we have with this, especially right now, while we have the state legislature in session, and now is a great time to be talking to the legislature, to the Department of Education, about making sure we as a school board, in partnership with the legislature, can respond to local needs.
Thank you, Member Gould. Member Gallo, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I want to thank Ms. Lindsay and her team for such a great job and for working so hard on this audit over the last few months. It was a lot of information to get together, especially the financial part, because I know we were waiting on the Department of Education for some of the information needed. So I really appreciate their hard work and all this great information. So I have a few comments, and then I have some questions. I just want to touch on the budget, because I've heard several board members say that we need to be more transparent, and it needs to be easy for parents in the community to kind of access the budget or the school budget just kind of see where the money is being spent. And I know we have it's the data portal from the Department of Education, and the financials is listed, but it's very confusing, right? Like if you go on it, it just kind of breaks it from the school level to the federal level, to school site funds, and then what's the indirect school costs. So it's not very easy to understand, or it really doesn't break down how the money's going. So I didn't know if maybe that was a possibility. Maybe we could look at putting something online that would be more easily understandable for parents in the communities to look at, since we already have a place or a placeholder on every school-based website already to go to the Edu portal, and there's so much information on there. And I know that we have to provide information on our SIP plan, which has like a lot of good information. So I just kind of want to throw that out there. Maybe that's a place where if we could list something that was a little bit more direct and a little bit more succinct that we could understand, it might be a good place to put it that parents could find easy, and would help us be more transparent. I do have a few questions. One was, in the presentation, Mrs. Lindsay commented on the differences between Palm Beach County and us, because their numbers are a little bit higher, is that they had different resources. And I just wanted to know what those resources were. Like, what resources does Palm Beach County have access to that we in Orange County would not?
Well,
Ms.
first of all, I didn't audit Palm Beach County, but I believe they have the same resources we do in terms of general sources. It's simply that they get the district cost differential, which gives them a bump. It's like a currency exchange, a dollar there has more, a dollar of FEFP funding there has a greater value than it does down here. Now, you could argue that it doesn't go necessarily any farther, and that would be appropriate, because that's the whole point of the district cost differential, is to even the scales, if you will, and balance that out. But in point of fact, the extra resources they have is just extra value in the same resources that we have. I may have not used the most correct term when I said that.
That help at all?
Okay, thank you. It did. I just, in looking at it did, and I appreciate that. I just didn't know if maybe they had a secret sauce that she came across in looking into other counties. But when you look at Palm Beach County, they are spending, even out of their own general funds, a lot more money than any other district in Florida. Like they are kind of the outlier in their per pupil spending for ESE students. And yet we just discussed when we talked about the makeup and how our population is different than other counties' population. Palm Beach was one of the counties brought up, and it was discussed that they had far fewer level 3s or level 4s and 5s, which are more intensive students. So my mind immediately goes, well, then their needs would be less, the cost would be less, but that's not what we're seeing on this chart. We're seeing a lot more funding be put into ESE. So I was just curious on that discrepancy, and if there was something to look at there, like are they doing something that we could replicate or figure out? That was my point to asking that question.
I will tell you, Member Gallo, I did put that question to the ESE management team just to see if they, in discussions with their counterparts in Palm Beach, had learned any insights as to what might be going on down there. They indicated they had not, that as best they know, and I don't mean to speak for them, they can speak for themselves, but the report back was it seemed like they were doing the same things we are. I would like to point out to the board, which I know you know, but just for purposes of the audience, to the extent that we go, or that any district goes deeper into its general funds to cover ESE program costs, at some point one might argue that you begin shortchanging the non-ESE student population. So obviously by law and by everything that's right morally, we need to provide the ESE students with the educations that are called for based on their various disabilities and IEPs, even if it costs more than the resources we are provided. But at some point, and I don't know what Palm Beach is doing, so please don't take the wrong message here, but at some point, if you go deeper and deeper down that path, then the parents of the non-ESE students might say, wait a minute, what about my child? So it's a delicate thing at some point. I don't think we're anywhere near that tipping point, because if you look across the state, if you look across the state, everyone is about in that same range. We're not an outlier and so forth, but that's just a point to consider.
Okay,
Madam
thank you.
Chair.
I appreciate that.
Member Gallo, if you could hold just a minute, I think Dr. Jenkins might have some comments to offer on that.
Yeah, we had some of the same curiosity, and so finance and some of the ESE department were trying to look into what the difference is there. What initially comes to mind, but we've not confirmed yet, is that they have that additional teacher pay differential from their millage that may be inflating the cost of actual teachers. Don't know if that's the clue or not, but we're certainly looking into it.
And that would make sense, because, as I said earlier, a student with the identical IEP in Orange County or Palm Beach County or, St. Johns County or anywhere should theoretically cost the same, but we have variations in pay scales around the state, and and the biggest cost is people. So that makes perfect sense.
Member Gallo, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to talk just a minute about the substitutes. I think that, actually, I want to talk about two things. I think that we've kind of hit home on what we were trying to accomplish with the substitutes, or the need for our substitutes in our ESE classrooms to be have better training or receive better training, and we all understand the challenges or the barriers to getting that done. I think I loved Member Bird's idea, like offering it to them, and if they go through the training, they get a higher daily rate of pay than other substitutes. I think that there are trainings that you go to that as a sub you get a higher rate of pay. I went through it, and I think I made, $10 more a day than subs that didn't go through it back when I was subbing. So I think that's worth looking into, and I didn't know if we could look into, or if this is even a viable solution, but looking into that when we have a substitute, since there are no substitutes that are certified in ESE right now. I mean, we have ESE teachers that are subs, and they're probably few and far in between and hard to get into an ESE classroom right now. But if we're putting a non-ESE trained substitute into an ESE classroom, would it make sense then not to use ESE dollars for that sub? Would it make more sense to just use the pot of sub dollars that each principal has to cover that sub? I didn't know if that was something that we could look into, if that was a possibility, or if that would put, I don't want to put, strain on a principal's budget, but it just makes sense that if it's not an ESE trained and that person's not really trained in ESE and they're subbing the classroom and we're using ESE dollars, that maybe we could find it from another pot.
Yeah, but
And then,
No, that's all right. Go ahead.
all right, thank you. And then I wanted the ESSER funds. I know that over the last 2 years, well, actually, that's not true. Over the last year, we have taking some of our ESSER dollars, and there's been an infusion of ESSER dollars into our schools. Was any of that looked at, or do we have any numbers? Because I know that what we're showing here is that we're funding to the best of our ability. We're funding above what we receive from the state and from the federal government. We have received more federal dollars. And do we have any idea how much of those dollars are going towards our ESE students?
Dr. Jenkins, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, on the substitute issue, Member Gallo, it's an interesting concept. I don't think that's actually how, I don't know that there's a way to circumvent paying for subs in ESE classrooms with regular ed dollars. But the greater issue is there is no such certification at this point. And should we get that certification, I certainly don't want to limit and not have enough substitutes for my ESE classrooms, because those children have to be served regardless of the individual being certified or not. We have to have services and supervision for those classrooms. So certainly we can look into that. Kelly Services is an outside vendor. We can certainly talk with them around how they can incentivize all of their substitutes. Here's my solution. I'd like for all substitutes, because my ESE children are not always in self-contained classrooms. They're in all of our classrooms. We want them in the least restrictive environment. So I'd like for all of our substitutes to have modules completed that are going to help them better serve the needs of ESE students. And then I'm not hindering or limiting how many substitutes I can get for my ESE classrooms. Secondly, when it comes to to ESSER dollars, we do have some dollars that for learning loss that are provided for our ESE population. We can certainly refer you back to that discussion. I can't quote it for you here now, Member Gallo, but we do have ESSER dollars that are aimed at our ESE students as well. And not included in this calculation, of course, at this point, because
Thank you.
we don't have those dollars yet.
Thank you. Member Gallo.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dr. Jenkins. And I certainly appreciate the need to make sure that we have subs in all our classrooms, especially our ESE classrooms. I wanted to point out, and I know that I discussed this with Mrs. Lindsay during our conversation when we talked about when we split money, when we have to do the split and they're coming out of ESE funds, the guarantee funds, that when that happens, that we are tracking that those students are that they're getting differentiated learning. Like I want to make sure that the public is aware that when we split, like if you have ESE students in a classroom and half the money is going to that teacher, that teacher is providing differentiated learning to those students. So they have to actually provide more, more than what they would to the other students for that money to be split. Is that correct, or can you explain that a little bit better than I did, Mrs. Lindsay?
I think so. When we talked, your concern was that if the teacher was partially funded from ESE sources, that they were indeed providing something other than the same classroom instruction all of their students get to that subset that was an ESE student. And in response to your question, I said, of course, because there's either an EP or an IEP that governs what needs to happen. We were talking about gifted, so I'll focus on gifted at that time. And there are many ways to serve gifted students. There can be, particularly if they're in the same classroom, there can be different assignments, some enriching assignments that are part of the curriculum, but the gifted student is given something more challenging or an additional enrichment type of activity that is appropriate for their EP, or there can be other types of activities that occur during the course of the instructional day or week, and that would happen in the classroom even as it were blended. Does that address your comment?
It does. Thank you. Thank you very much. And then one final thing, Madam Chair.
Yes, of course. Member Gallo, you're recognized.
I just want to kind of piggyback on what some of my other board members have discussed. I think that we've already kind of tackled that the majority of these ESE dollars are being spent on personnel that are in our schools that are directly helping our students, and that the cost of the money that goes to the ELC is very minimal. So I appreciate the other school board members that brought that up, that asked that question. And I also just want to state that I agree with Member Byrd. I really appreciate this presentation today. I love that it was broken down. It was easy to understand, and I'm hoping that this will be helpful to our parents who had many questions. I think moving forward, I agree with Member Byrd. We need to keep moving forward. We still have a lot of work to do in ESE. I know that we're making progress, and I'm looking forward to making more progress, and I'm proud of the district and the board for all the work that we've done and we're trying to do on behalf of ESE students. So with that, that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Member Gallo, and well said. Member Lopez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Lindsay, as I told you in private, I highly appreciate your professionalism and also your commitment with our community and with the ESE students. I think that is a great job. We all, I think that the district and the board are looking for transparency and trust. I love the fact that you have, you and your department identify deficiencies, data, survey, I think that the survey is very fair by having different schools, different populations, different type of demographics. So I think that it, is very fair. We always have space to grow. But I have a few questions about the Kelly services, because I know that is a challenge about not having substitute with certifications or ESC credentials. But at the school level, do we have any type of initiative or program for teachers' aid to have ESC credentials, or to help them to become ESC teachers, or not?
I believe we do, and I'd like to defer that question to Dr. Jenkins, because they manage that.
Dr. Jenkins?
Dr. Vasquez can speak to that.
Dr. Vasquez?
Yes. In collaboration with our Human Resources Department, we've had a program in place for several years where classified staff is able to attend, I believe it's Rollins University, and acquire their 4-year degree. It's been a very successful program. Dr. Williams would be able to provide the actual number of graduates that we have had, and we encourage anyone out there who is interested to reach out to our Human Resources Department. We are always looking for talent within our own organization.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that information. And I also want to emphasize that every single time I have a situation with an ESC student in my district and I approach the ESC department, they always find a solution. So I encourage the parents that are listening to this work session to keep going with those conversations. Don't feel afraid. Talk to us. We want to build the transparency and the trust. So I am very pleased. 100% of the parents that approach me, I always have a response from Dr. Schuler, Ian, Avi, so I highly appreciate that as well. So I know that it's a challenge because in the ESC department is so unique. Every case is so independent, so individualized, and it's so hard. We cannot generalize. So feel free to speak to us. And if you have, imagine that if you have ESC student plus is an ESOL student, so it's more complicated. So if you feel more comfortable, speaking Spanish, I'm here too. So, and we have in the department, we also have people who speak Spanish, and we have people who speak Haitian Creole as well. So I just want to emphasize that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Lopez. Excellent points. So we are about wrapping up. Let me go to Member Byrd, and then I have a couple of closing comments, and we'll move on to our next topic.
I'll be quick. I just thought that I would check to see if I was reflecting on how much I really do love reading these audit reports. And I was trying to see if we have it easily accessible for families to see these audit reports on our website. And you can if you go click on departments and then look for the internal audit, which, I was looking under A for audit, or, it took me a minute, right? Okay, so my point is maybe we could put a link to the audits, all the audits that are being done, or all the audit reports under school board, since the auditor works for the school board. That might be an easy way. That way parents would just have one click, because it was a little tricky to find. It took a lot of steps. So I think if someone saw audit reports on there and it was just one click, it would be easier. Because I think that you answer a lot of questions that people come to us all the time asking in all of your reports. So I would just like to make that suggestion.
Excellent. Well, another suggestion might be that we just look at our search engine, because sometimes I do get a little frustrated with the search engine because I want to be able to put the word audit in, and it just to take me. So I don't know. I don't know enough about technology to know. I think that's something you contract out with or something. But great points by everyone. I want to thank you again, Ms. Lindsay, for excellent work on this and the entire audit, but bringing us home to a close on this issue is really helpful. I think I don't want to reiterate a couple of comments that I heard. First, Member Gould, if you're still with us, when you spoke about congressional members suggesting that we use ESC dollars ESSER dollars, not ESC dollars, ESSER dollars for raises. If those are our local congressional members, please let us know. I'm thinking that maybe there'd be a way that we could politely send some correspondence up to clarify the challenge that would create. I think sometimes we think that if you run for office, you're going to be a jack of all trades, and we all know that's not the case. So understanding finance and sustainable budgets isn't necessarily something you have to know at the legislative level. So it would be helpful probably to clear up any confusion around that. I also want to echo the words of Vice Chair. I'm a little surprised because when my kids were in school, I was on their SAC committee. I was vice chair. I was chair of the SAC committee. I thought PTA was good, but SAC was, like you said, that's where the decisions get made. That's where you understand how things are allocated. That's where you can have tremendous impact. And I even got involved with the SAC committee and attended all the meetings 2 years before my kids started middle school, because I knew middle school was going to be a rough time. And I figured the more engaged I was, the more the administration, the teachers, everybody saw me. I wanted them to see me as a positive influence. So when I tried to sit in on a classroom before my kids were in school, I wasn't exactly seen positive. And the lack of positive reception and trying to keep me out made me suspicious and gave me cause to wonder what was going on in the classroom, that the union had this provision that I couldn't go in without. Anyway, the whole thing made me very nervous as a mom with a child entering middle school in 2 years. So I'll never take the mom out of me, and the experiences that I've had along the way, good and some not so good, that do help shape how I respond to the things that I hear from parents and students and teachers today. The good, the bad, and the sometimes problematic. Most of the time those problematics are not accurate, and there's always another side to the story, but for anybody listening, I'll always be the mom first. And I think that's probably what we all need to be. So, Ms. Lindsay, thank you again. We will be calling on you again. I know you're always working on audits for us, but I'm sure this board will be asking for your insight along the way, and we're forever grateful to you and your team and your advisory committee as well for the support that you provide this district. All right, we are Member Gould, and then we're going to move on to communication with our legislators. Member Gould, you're recognized.
So I just wanted to follow up. That was on National Public Radio report this morning. I didn't catch who was cited as the quote about utilizing that funding to give raises across the country. It wasn't local, because I would remember that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, wonderful. Well, maybe we'll get the Council of Great City Schools to see if they can track down that person and politely help educate them. But I know our delegation so well as you do, and I know all of them would be welcome to hearing from us if we had any advice on what works and doesn't work. It's one of the things I do love is our local delegation, both at the state and the national level, are very, very supportive of us, and we're blessed to have that support. We are going to talk about two letters. One that the superintendent has asked us to review. It doesn't require a vote of the board, but we'd like the board to be aware. And I always want to know, if I'm communicating with the board, if there's any hesitation that the board has about that, because I try to be very respectful of, I'm the chair, but I'm not the voice of this board if you're not comfortable with my voice. So let me start with the superintendent on the assessment issue. Dr. Jenkins?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Board members will see, including those who are online, I did email you the latest draft. Actually, it is addressed to Commissioner Corcoran. For the past 2 years, Florida Department of Education has waived Florida's standards assessment testing in schools because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Orange County Public Schools continues to face challenges as a result of the pandemic and the obstacles that have disrupted learning opportunities for our students. Our district currently serves more than 206,000 students and employs 14,000 teachers. The Delta and Omicron variants have had a huge negative impact on student and teacher attendance this school year since January 4th, 2022. We believe this level of learning disruption justifies flexibility under state and federal accountability systems. OCPS specifically requests that FLDOE provide the same flexibility provided last year for school grades. If you recall, that was schools could opt in to receive a grade, district could opt in for specific schools to receive grades if they so desired. Also, the third grade retention requirements and teacher evaluation calculations. To fulfill our vision to ensure every student has a promising and successful future, OCPS also is requesting that FDOE reevaluate the FSA testing schedule for implementing new scores for this year's graduating seniors and allow the previous scores to be applied to the 2021-22 school year. These suggested recommendations will help lead Florida students to success. Thank you for your consideration and response to educational needs during the COVID-19 pandemic. Several board members raised this issue. I believe Hillsborough and Miami-Dade had sent a solicitation to the commissioner, and we wanted to respond as well. I think this covers basically where our concerns rest. I've heard positive murmurings, at least, that there might be consideration this year because we have not fully recovered and students are still suffering from lost learning time. And we don't want our teachers punished either, where they have to have calculations made that impact their compensation based on some very challenging times here in our district. So we're very hopeful. We'd like to send this signed by the chair and by the superintendent to the commissioner. Certainly didn't get any written feedback. Certainly want to hear if you have any additions or concerns about this communication before we go on to the second one.
All right, I don't see any buttons. Member Colbert, you're recognized.
Just very quickly, I appreciate the advocacy on this issue, vital not only for students but for teachers, like you said. And I'm glad we're having this conversation up here because we do, as a body, advocate with our legislators and with the Department of Education all the time, but I don't think the public gets to see that. And so I'm glad we're having this conversation here. So thank you for that and for reading the letter to them.
Thank you. Dr. Jenkins, anything further? Okay. All right. The second issue is a bill that you all have been hearing about through Mr. Lagash, who might be here with us in the room.
He's in Tallahassee.
Oh, no, of course he's not. Goodness gracious. No, he's in Tallahassee. And the bill isn't exactly on point, but there were several reasons that I thought it would be good for us to be on record with our local delegation and the entire legislature, for that matter, because there's been so much conversation about library materials. There is some concern that I have that there may still be a swing in a direction. There's some conversation about what should be discussed in classrooms at different age levels, and I just don't want there to be any ambiguity about where this district stands on the issue of having materials available for our LGBTQ plus youth in our schools. And so I had asked for support of Scott just the end of last week, and Jason, if they would put together a rough draft for us to look at. Made a few minor revisions to it. It is here in front of us. I'll read it very quickly, but the primary goal is just make sure we're ahead of any change that might come, that we've given notice to the legislature where we stand on this, but we've also given our team in Tallahassee a tool to take back with them around, because I don't expect, quite frankly, I wish I could tell you that every legislator is going to read this, say, let me drop everything, see what Orange County has to say. Probably not the case. Our members will, but not everybody will, but at least our staff would have a tool in hand should they need it. The letter reads, Dear Florida legislators, as the fourth largest school district in the state, serving more than 2,006 students, Orange County Public Schools is a place where all students have the right to learn in a safe and welcoming environment, free from harassment or discrimination. With values that include inclusion and respect, we believe education must cultivate acceptance and respect for everyone, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. OCPS also supports positive representation of all children in literature, in which they can freely see themselves. We are committed to including age-appropriate, non-sexually explicit reading materials in our libraries that help all children grow into productive citizens with the critical thinking skills necessary to contribute positively to society. I see a typo there. As we work together to lift up all of Florida's children towards promising and successful futures, we hope you will stand with us in our efforts to promote awareness, understanding, and acceptance of others. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Respectfully signed by myself and Dr. Jenkins, unless this board has concerns. Member Gallo, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am very happy with the letter. I like the intent of the letter, and I like that, as Linda mentioned, that we're openly advocating for what we feel is important here in Orange County. And I love that it has a positive tone, because we're being positive in our desire and our want to lift these children up and to make sure every child in Orange County Public Schools feels safe and accepted and loved and supported. And that's our role as school board members, is to support all of our students. So I just love that it's a positive message that just says, you know what, we support all our students, and we're going to do everything within our power to make sure they're successful, just like we would for any other student in our district, and that's important to us. And I think that's what this letter does. It says this is important to us, and it's important that we communicate to our community that it's important to us. And I think it's important for them to hear our voice on this. So thank you, Madam Chair, and Dr. Jenkins, and for all who played a part in crafting this letter. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Member Gallo. Member Byrd, Vice Chair, you're recognized.
I'm just going to echo what Member Gallo said. I totally agree that the tone of this letter is just so positive. It says exactly what we need them to hear and what's important to us as a board. So I really do appreciate you writing this letter. I do agree too that the public needs to know that this is where we stand. Because these bills that are being proposed in Tallahassee are frightening for many reasons, but specifically because they completely go against everything we talk about in this letter. So I think it's important, as you mentioned earlier, to get the public to advocate. I think if the public knew what was happening in Tallahassee, I try to share as much as I can with the public that I talk to, but I think that they need to be made aware. And when the public knows about things that are happening, they show up, just like they did for the Bright Futures bill last legislative session. They showed up, they spoke at session, they reached out to their legislators, and that bill fell by the wayside. So I think as much as we can get them engaged, the better. And I would just like to make sure I don't know how the communication department is going to handle the letter, but if we can somehow make sure that our public knows about that we're sending this letter to Tallahassee, that would be a good thing as well.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Maybe we could find a way to, along with sending it to them, send it out either as an attachment to news you could use or something along those lines, so we can get it into the hands of the public. And we have our communications meeting coming up, and we often talk about ways to put maybe a little corner in there for messages from the board. This could go into that category too. There's been a lot of talk about library material, and I think it's extremely important for people, especially our children, to know where we stand on this issue. And I do have one. I'm going to go to Member Kessler-Dental. I do have one question. I am so sorry. There's no end to the number of times I can edit a document. It is one of my shortcomings. I will have to acknowledge that. But when I read it again this morning, I did wonder if we should add, when we talk about having cultivating acceptance and respect for everyone. We didn't include race, ethnicity. We didn't include religion. The focus of this really was on what the legislature is focused on, or may be focused on. However, I wouldn't want anyone to read this letter and not understand that we take equity and inclusion very seriously at all levels. So just food for thought that we could work that into that sentence. But the gist of this letter is really about our LGBTQ students and protecting them. Dr. Jenkins, and then I'll go to Member Castellano.
So, Madam Chair, I love editing as well. So we might say instead, respect for everyone, and emphasize that word everyone, including, instead of regardless of, you could say including.
We could say regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression.
I was looking to narrow it, but we can expand it.
Oh, okay.
We can expand
if you've got a way to narrow it, go ahead. And
so I was going to say respect for everyone. Yeah, regardless has still got to go in there. Or maybe we just emphasize or bold everyone. Because if you start listing different categories, it's going to get steep.
Yeah.
So I think maybe if we emphasize the word everyone, and I wanted to have the word including instead of regardless, but we could say including our LGBTQ community.
Okay, Member Castellano.
And then I want to make sure I got your one typo as well. Was it who instead of who contribute?
Okay, with critical skills, all children grow into productive citizens with the critical thinking skills necessary. Should not be who contribute.
Got it.
To contribute.
Got it.
Member Castellano. And I'm sorry, the reason I held off is because if I was going to suggest a change here, I thought it would be easier to get everybody's thought on that. So
Sure.
You're on the spot. On the hot seat right now, I guess, huh?
Me?
Yeah.
No.
Your comments and your thoughts.
No, I'm good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
No, I want to just say that I appreciate these letters being taken to Tallahassee to reflect the sentiments of the board. And I know that, we're coming off some important impasse meetings, and the current environment around our teachers is important, as with how stressful the job has become these last few years. Well, this last decade really, but in particular this last few weeks with what we've experienced with the impasse, and we've talked up here about our efforts to support teachers, support the profession, do what we can to eliminate some of the burdensome workload, increase morale, because those are also important. And so I'm really happy that we have people who are in Tallahassee now with Scott Howitt and Jason Lagash representing the board. And we have some board members going up today or tomorrow, and some who are already there. I just want to point out that there are bills in Tallahassee right now that have been in committee that are not supportive of teachers. And I really would hope that our board, when you go up, make sure you discuss in particular some of those bills, because we can't say we support teachers and we're doing what we can to help the profession and then go to Tallahassee and support the opposite. I know you would agree with that. I know there's also a bill, House Bill 1203, that restricts teachers' ability to bargain when it comes to evaluations. And I don't think that is something that we would support, having just said that we support teachers and the profession so much. And that is a critical aspect of teachers' bargaining rights. So, but I do appreciate all of you going up there, because it's not easy to go up to Tallahassee. It's not always a friendly environment, especially with school boards under attack as well as you enter the building. I appreciate that you all are taking your time to go. I wish I could go with you. And at the same time, I'm so glad I'm not. But my thoughts are with you all, and I appreciate the time that you're taking to go up there and really support the school boards in general, the concept of a school board, our employees, our students, funding. There's so much going on right now. Your presence up there will make a difference or an impact, even if things don't always go our way. We have to keep fighting. So while you all are up there, I'll be reaching out to some of the local delegation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Castellano, and I was counting on that. Thank you. Member Gallo. Member Gallo?
Hi, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I'm here. That must be an old queue. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. If there's no further comments from the board, then I'm about to adjourn the meeting. Last call. 3, 2, 1. Meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all so much for being here today. It was a good day.
Those of you
Have a
heading
good afternoon.
Those of you heading to Tallahassee, we'll have a hard copy for you upstairs. If you'll wait just a minute, we'll have a copy for you, and we'll email it to everyone as well.